tracking of Millennium Development Goals. And he did his PhD from ISI, joined the faculty of Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research in 1988. He has been teaching the courses on statistics, econometrics, development economics, food policy analysis, human development, and Indian economy at IGIDR and elsewhere, many other universities. He has formulated and taught a course on food policy at the Maastricht Graduate School of Governance. In India, he has been on the many committees of the Government of India, both at the Ministry of Industry and Planning Commission, and he was the editor of the Indian Journal of Agricultural Economics, and he has been the expert member on the ICSSR research programs and the union and the state governments. And he was at the international level, he was a visiting fellow at the Economic Growth Center, Yale University, and senior economic advisor at International Poverty Center, UNDP. And he also served as a consultant for ADB, OECD, UNDP, World Bank, and provided technical assistance to developing country governments. And he co-authored an inequality adjusted human development report for the states in India, and particularly in Maharashtra, and wrote a second generation MGD report on Brunei Darussalam, and finalized a poverty monitoring and analysis system for 3 administrations of Somalia. And Professor Suryanarayana is the chair professor of ICCR at the King's India Institute, UK, from January to March. It is a great privilege, particularly on the research methodology, techniques, and related issues. He has been teaching, and he has been considered as one of the eminent persons in this area. I would welcome you, Professor Suryanarayana, and with these things, in spite of your busy schedule, you agree.
No, sir. Thank you very much, sir. It is my privilege.
Thank you very much, sir, for being with us and the participants.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Good afternoon, friends. And I thank Professor Murthy for his kind words on me. So it's so nice of him. And let me see. And at a very short, Professor Murthy, I was wondering what to talk on. In fact, as he mentioned, I have also worked on a couple of issues related to industry, because I was working at the Bureau of Industrial Cost and Prices for 2 years. So I worked on many issues related to industry also. So, but today, what I thought I was wondering, I thought I would talk on ethics in research, because this is an important issue which needs a lot of attention. For a variety of reasons, our Indian academic training programs don't lay emphasis on that. We are not at all, very serious about the kind of issues that we have to be taken care of while doing research. So I thought, and particularly in the recent months, people have been inviting me to give a talk on this kind of issues. So that's the reason, given its seriousness, I thought I would speak on ethics in research. And I thank Professor Murthy. He immediately agreed and accepted. He told me that would be a nice topic. So that's what I propose to do in 1.5 hours. Suppose if I finished early, you can ask me any question, any day. We can have a frank discussion on any issue related to industrial research. I know this is a topic going to be research methodology course in industrial research, and I'm going to give a talk on something very slightly general topic. Okay, so what I will do is I have a PPT, and I will just share with you so that I can proceed fast. And afterwards, anytime you can stop me and ask me clarifications, questions, anything. Okay, let me just. Can you see my PPT?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Let me tell you right at the beginning, and with the message I written here, this presentation is based on different published sources, which I acknowledge. Essentially, this kind of acknowledgement is not enough. I essentially just to tell you, quite often, because I'm going to talk about plagiarism, quite often people plagiarize and give some very, some acknowledgement at the footnote, or very, indirectly they give acknowledgements without really specifying the source, etc. So that's the reason I said this. I mean, just to convey the message that I have given acknowledgement here, but this is what I call cheating. I cannot give this kind of acknowledgement. If I have taken some source, I should explicitly acknowledge them. That is what is missing in research, particularly even in a country. Everywhere it is done, but in India also we find this is missing. So what I'm going to do is I'll just talk about some of the issues here with this particular reference to plagiarism. Okay, so what do you mean? You may ask me, what do you mean by ethics in research? In a strict sense, it refers to, the need for honesty and also respect all the different stakeholders who are affected by your research studies. We essentially emphasize the need for to be honest in your research undertaking with respect to every dimension. So I'm not. What I'm going to do is I'm just talking about one special case of and unethical actions in research, that is plagiarism. Fine. So let me just say, so just to emphasize the seriousness or importance of this topic, I'll just say how serious it is, about how prevalent it is. I'll give a couple of examples. Then I will go into details like what is plagiarism, how do you preempt plagiarism, all those issues I will touch upon. How serious is the offense? In the US, it is a serious offense. In an academic institution, they may just give you a F grade on your paper, or F grade even on your course. Sometimes you may even end up thrown out of the course, in extreme cases. So this is what is happening in America. But in India, I have put it very sarcastically, you get rewarded. Quite often, what you do is you can see eminent personalities. I don't want to name them, doing all this plagiarism. You might have seen that. Those of you who read newspapers carefully, regularly, you might have seen that recently Indian Express removed from its online a published article which was by an eminent personality of the Indian economic scenario, an advisor, because where if that advisor had plagiarized paragraphs and some published and unpublished papers, etc., without any acknowledgement. Indian Express has done that. And in fact, on academic institution has even removed that faculty from its roles. No, in other words, one thing is that there is serious awareness, but many places, quite often this is not taken care of at all. People don't bother about them. So let me just give you let us define what is plagiarism. Essentially, it is a glorified term for, you call it stealing, fraud, cheat, etc. Now, just I'm talking about a common man's in terms of how a common man would say. Let me just go to the dictionary definition. I'm just this is I put in quotes. I have taken from the Merriam-Webster online dictionary. What does plagiarize mean? To steal or pass off. Some ideas of someone another person. You may just take, steal somebody's ideas and just pass it on as your own ideas. That is plagiarism. Or to use, again, without another production, without crediting the source, somebody's production, you may just use it. That is also plagiarism. To commit literary theft and to present a new and original, as if it's your new and original idea, you may just take it from someone exist published source. Quite often we come across this kind of instances in academic literature and also in newspaper articles, everything. So in this case, let me just give the famous example of Farid Zakaria. He's an Indian from Bombay, but he was well known for some of his programs in the CNN called the Farid Zakaria GPS, Global Public Square. Essentially, where he used to show focus on international issues and foreign affairs. Every Sunday it used to appear in CNN. Then he also used to publish regularly articles in Time, the Post, etc., about our world affairs. He was a well-known personality, or he used to comment regularly. But the question is, once he was, a couple of times he was caught red-handed. Since in an article, actually, there was an article by historian Jill Lapore, which was published by the New Yorker magazine, April 2012. And I have reproduced this exact paragraph where Lapore wrote, laws banning the carrying of concealed weapons were passed in Kentucky and Louisiana in 1813, and other states soon followed. Similar laws were passed in Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, and the governor of Texas explained in 1893 the mission of the concealed deadly weapon is murder. So this is what actually the Lepore wrote. What Farid Zakaria did was he just put the same sentences, slightly changed them. He wrote, in his article in Time magazine, in the case he wrote in the case for gun control. He wrote an article, and to be precise, on August 20, 2012. He said laws that banned the carrying of concealed weapons were passed in Kentucky and Louisiana in 1830. Other states soon followed. You can see that exactly message is the same, and the sentences are almost the same. Slight permutation is there. Similar laws were passed in Texas, Florida, Oklahoma. So, for example, this if you compare these two paragraphs, this is virtually Mr. Zakaria has virtually lifted, and some try to do some permutation. So this is a very classic case of plagiarism, where Mr. Zakaria had to pay a very heavy price. He was suspended. He was immediately suspended from all these newspapers, and everyone, they suspended him. But we don't do it in India. You get to know, you get to very high positions. Unfortunately, the seriousness of the issues are not at all, well recognized in India. Okay, now let us, how did Zakaria defend it? I just want to give how to what extent people go. I just again quote him. I just reproduce his sentences. He said, as I write explicitly, this is not an academic work. General impression that we have to be honest and sincere only in academic work. In newspaper articles, in fact, I don't want to name some of our eminent parliamentarians write same article with different titles in different newspapers, everything. But people think that in newspapers and everything you can do anything. So, but it is not strictly so. And for Mr. Zakaria said, this is an academic work where everything has to be acknowledged and footnoted. This is how he tried to defend himself. And he also said the book contains hundreds of comments and quotes that are not attributed, because doing so would interrupt the flow of the reader. Because he wanted to say that it's important for us to ensure readability. It should be readers friendly. So that's why he said I can't keep on footnoting or acknowledging each and every issue that I said. So that's the reason I just reproduce ideas or sentences, etc. This is how Mr. Zakaria and we try to defend his case. But the question is, in case you are interested, all these issues have been widely reported even in Indian newspapers. India Today, I have given that reference where you can look at it. In other words, the main message of the Zakaria, even though it is just a newspaper article, he had to pay a very heavy price, and he was suspended. Okay. Now let me just talk about Indian examples. In India, we can come across this kind of cutting and pasting everywhere. I'm just to give you an example from the Economic Survey 2012-13. Page number 273. I'm just showing you where it is. There is a good section on inequality. Economic Survey of the Government of India. But there is a definition it gives you before giving the estimates of inequality. The Economic Survey gives the definition of Gini ratio. What is Gini ratio? Gini quotient, it measures the deviation of distribution of income or consumption among the individuals within a country from a perfectly equal distribution. This is a perfect case of plagiarism, because this is not anyone's original contribution. What this is simply lifted from the UNDP Human Development Report. I am just giving, I just cut and taken a snap of this economic survey. This is given in the economic survey. They simply taken from the Human Development Report of the UNDP, but every year at the end it gives a definition of Gini ratio. This is the Gini ratio definition given in the UNDP report. This is plagiarism. Most important issue that is important that we have to notice, this definition is wrong. This is not the definition of a Gini ratio at all. So it reveals many things. It reveals that how ill-informed our policymakers are. They don't even know what is Gini ratio, but there is a full chapter on Gini ratio. So what is the main message? You should understand the concepts. You should understand the techniques before you use them, before you write about them. If the economic expert advisor who wrote this economic survey doesn't even know what is Gini ratio, then what is the credibility of the full chapter on inequality? I'm talking about the Government of India report. It represents several Indian research publications also. So what happens is sometimes people don't get published at all, punished at all. I'm just giving an example without naming any institution. I was involved. I was another examiner. There was an MPhil thesis. There was a large-scale plagiarism. The student has simply, now in this internet era, what happens is if you just Google and to give any topic, we'll get wide example literature published from different universities, student theses available in different university websites, etc. So what people students do quite often, they just cut and paste. There was one such MPhil thesis where the student was punished, but the supervisor was not. I give you many more examples like that. Now I'm to give you another well-known example from the Bombay University. I'm very happy to note that Bombay, many places people don't bother about them, but Bombay University was very, very strict. It went to the High Court. There is a student by name Bunker. It is a newspaper, so I'm confidently appearing in Times of India. He wrote a thesis called History of Educational Progress of Scheduled Tribes in Thane District. So immediately, on a scholar by name Mahendra Nashikar, he made a complaint that he has plagiarized. This thesis contained parts of plagiarism, his own original article. So what did the University of Bombay do? When this Mr. Nashikar complained to Bombay University, Bombay University took a very firm stand. It banned Mr. Bunker from the PhD program for a period of 5 years. And is banned again his teacher from acting as a research guide. This is precisely what happened in the Bombay University. So in other words, I'm giving this example to show that there is an increasing awareness among academic institutions in India. So I'm just giving this whole, I've just cut and paste. I took a photocopy of this newspaper, Times of India. This is where it was reported, and in the in a news side report in 2013, February 12th. But the people, Mumbai newspaper completely reports about the plagiarism issue and what finally it was taken to the High Court, and the Mumbai High Court upheld the decision of the University of Mumbai. So this is another example of plagiarism. Okay. And I can give you many examples like that. As Professor Murthy already told you that I was the editor of the Indian Journal of Agricultural Economics. Quite often I had a tough time referring papers and ensuring that they meet minimum standards. Again, as Professor Murthy and both of us were in several committees, and I can share with you my ICSR experience. So quite often we evaluate research projects submitted by experts. Quite often we come across this situation, these instances of plagiarism. Let me share with you my own experience as an academician. Quite often when I evaluate dissertations or papers, etc., I find an instance of plagiarism which is rampant. So that's the reason I thought this is a very important issue which has become rampant in the country, and all of us have to make a sincere attempt to ensure that the extent of plagiarism is zero in our research output. Okay, so now let me just say what exactly is plagiarism? How do we go about it? Let me just give you some example concepts and how to avoid it. What are the situations which really end up in creating instances of plagiarism? I'm not going to give this kind of examples now. There are many concepts. For example, you may just copy another expert's work. Or you may also borrow someone else's original ideas and pass it on as your own idea. In fact, there are many complaints against many leading luminaries in India. I don't know, we might have seen this. I don't want to name any of them with due regard. But let me just say one important concept. If you simply steal somebody's work or somebody's idea, we call it plagiarism. Okay, and another thing is, you may steal and communicate. Then you may just write it up in your own paper as without acknowledging the source. So all these things involved in stealing work, and all this, and it was actually first case is complete stealing. Second, so in the second case, you steal it, but you conceal it. You don't acknowledge it. So this is one sort of plagiarism that we find in academic literature very often. Then why does one steal ideas and words, and what are the costs? It is just actually ideas are in intellectual property, but they are protected by copyright laws. We can't just take anyone's ideas. Particularly so, what happens is sometimes you may say that it is there my own paper. I will give you that sort of example also. I will give you. Mm, So whenever somebody creates a new idea or new technique, it may be the creation of a new econometric technique or econometric specification. They all come under what are called copyright protection. So it is very important. So you can't just copy and call them as if they're your own publication, as your own ideas. So this is precisely what is quite often we come across in academic literature everywhere. As you know, there is one international journal which really, if you are caught of plagiarism, it displays their name, everything on their website. So I think now we have to be very, very careful when we take ideas from others. We should duly acknowledge them. How to go about it? I'll do that. I'll give different types of examples for plagiarism. One is, as I already told you, using someone else's work as one's own. Or that is one thing. Sometimes people, another version of this plagiarism is you just copy words. Simply take, like, for example, this Bunker's thesis. He simply took one full paragraph from a published source and put it at his own material in his PhD thesis. And then his supervisor also didn't bother. He simply said, so actually, finally, he had to pay a heavy price for that. Now, what people do is people even copy ideas also without acknowledging. In fact, personally, I have come across many situations where people copy ideas. First time they acknowledge, afterwards they don't acknowledge. They think that is completely their ideas. It is also unpardonable. So we have to be very, very careful. Then another thing is, I come across, while referring papers for even journals like magazines like EPW, I have come across another source of type of plagiarism. What people do is they give wrong information about the source. In fact, there is some well-respected scholar complete took sentences from some published source, published in 2014, but wrong information, somewhere is given wrong information, saying that somewhere else that origin source is cited. People try to do also. They don't even actually, if you really completely take sentences as they are, you have to put them in quotations actually. Well, I will come to that. Sometimes what people do, like the way Mr. Zakaria did, permutation of sentence structures without giving credit. That's precisely what Mr. Zakaria did. I gave an example, no? So he just took some permutation and doesn't give any credit to the original author. Another source of plagiarism is cutting and pasting words. This is quite often students do. I have come across many situations where students write their thesis. In fact, my first example case was a student wrote a thesis on contagion. So the students simply downloaded some dissertations from American University, simply cut and paste of the sentences. In those days, we didn't have any mechanism to identify it. You may ask, how do we go about it? There's a well-known software called Turnitin. We always use that. Submit the entire piece, your article to the Turnitin, and it cross-verifies and tells you the extent of plagiarism, similarity of ideas, words, everything it gives. But some 20 years back, we didn't have it. For the first time, I identified plagiarism when I was examining a thesis on contagion. You may ask, how do you find out? When I was going through the thesis dissertation, I found that quite often the English language style, grammar, everything keeps changes. And I thought, how can it happen? The same author is the same author. Style keeps changing. Grammar can style. Sometimes you get excellent Shakespeare in English. Sometimes we find it very poor style, etc. So the origin, so then I found that all where the English is bad or grammatically incorrect sentences must be original. All this, there's very excellent English style and presentation means it must have copied from somewhere. So those days we didn't have Turnitin. So I tried to Google and these sentences and try to source, identify the source. That's how I identify the source of plagiarism in that first MPhil thesis, for which I was the examiner. So this is quite often we come across this kind of situations. People just plagiarize. People take sentences, don't ideas, and sometimes sentences. Sometimes they take sentences, change them just to do some permutations, or change the active voice to passive voice, passive voice to active voice. All these such situations, come under what we call plagiarism. This is not an acceptable. Such instances are not at all acceptable in our research. It is not good ethics. So very, very important. But this has become very, very rampant in India today. So now let me just give you tell you how to go about how to avoid plagiarism. Do you have any questions now? No. Any one of you, if any comments or clarification, let me know. Fine. So how do you do? What do you do? What are the how to avoid plagiarism? One thing is we should cite sources. Exactly from where you have taken these borrowed these ideas. If you have just taken ideas, just mention them. And otherwise, you might have taken sentences also. Then it should give exact guidelines where exactly this sentence, where do these sentences appear, in which article, where is it published, date of publications. All those details are very, very important, to avoid plagiarism. So now let me just say, what is meant by citation? Citation essentially it means you should be honest and keep transparency in your article. You should inform the reader about which part, what portion of your work is taken from another source. You just openly confess that they are not your original ideas. You have taken ideas from some published source. Give due credit to that. Okay, and it is not enough. You should give complete bibliographical details to the reader. Quite often, people, I told I have come across situations. I have come across when I refuse papers for different journals. I have come across situations where people simply give, simply name somebody or give some year. That's not enough. You have to give complete details, information about the author, title of his work, publisher, date of publication, and even the page numbers from where you have taken this paragraph. These are very, very important. You should follow all these rules very systematically when you do research. Not only research, when you publish articles also, even when you should make it a matter of habit. When you either use an academic paper or it may be a news article for a newspaper, you have to systematically follow these procedures. Proper citation is very, very important. But unfortunately, we are not taught like that. Like I don't say that. When I'm giving a talk on this plagiarism. I'm afraid during my younger days, even I might have done that. I don't say that I'm a perfect academician in this sense. Originally I was a student of history and political science. Those days in my universities, people used to emphasize you're supposed to mug up sentences and reproduce them. We are taught like that. So we had in political science a well-known author called Appadare. So you are supposed, if you can reproduce those sentences as they are, you get full marks, something like that. So students were taught to mug up and reproduce the same sentences. And again, if you look at in English literature or any regional language, if you look at classical poems, or it may be even Wordsworth, etc. Those days, in my study, I don't know what is the practice now. During my students, I still remember words we have to mug up Wordsworth, the different poems, Ode to a Nightingale and everything. And there will be a question paper, just reproduce the first paragraph of the Ode to a Nightingale or second paragraph Ode to a Nightingale, or they will give you the beginning sentence and you have to fill up the column and the remaining sentences. Now, sometimes we are taught to, we are trained to plagiarize sometimes, if I may use the word. No, we are not taught that, understanding the ideas and developing your own concepts and techniques. We are not taught like that. This is a major shortcoming of some of our academic training. So I hope it is no longer so. But at least if I have to recall my own experience, and we were taught like that, mug up and reproduces. And if you reproduce neatly, you get full 5 marks or 10 marks. At least they used to be after 100 marks, at least we used to have some 10 or 20 marks just for mugging up and reproducing those sentences. So this is an important reason, why, possibly we have inculcated this habit of plagiarizing. But it's very important, it is no longer so, you have to understand the concept, you should understand the technique, and you should write it in your own words. Look at this economic survey which I cited, economic survey of the government of India. The author, he didn't even know what is Gini ratio. If he had known, he would have simply reproduced those sentences. He simply reproduced the sentences from the UNDP's Human Development Report. Okay, so as a result, what happened was that there was plagiarism. It reveals two things. One thing is plagiarism itself is wrong. Second, importantly, message is that the expert who wrote this economic survey doesn't even know what is economic inequality. Then there are paragraphs and paragraphs on his estimates of inequality and their measurement, interpretation, etc. One doesn't even know what do they mean, how far his interpretations are valid. Do they make sense? I can give this kind of examples from our fire plan documents also. We look at some technical note of the sixth fire plan. It gives details, estimates of Lawrence ratios. It compares them. It interprets them. In fact, our whole sixth fire plan strategy was based on a single table of Lawrence ratio estimates. It is very clear that the experts who prepared that technical sixth fire plan document didn't even know what is Lawrence ratio. How do you measure it? How do you estimate it? Most important, how do you interpret it? They didn't know. But the question is, they presented two tables of Lawrence ratios for consumption distribution, for rural India and urban India, and fitted some regression and found that there was a trend decline in inequality in India. They used this evidence to make a case for growth with redistribution strategy in India for achieving targets on poverty reduction. So why I'm giving this example is that it is a very, very serious business. Understanding a concept, understanding a technique, how do you interpret those concepts and estimates? This is very important. If you don't know, you will finally have this kind of mistakes like even our fire plan documents contain. So then we keep asking a question, even after 6 fire plans, where does India stand? Have we really achieved poverty reduction? What growth we have achieved? Because finally we end up we write articles and articles. We don't ask the fundamental questions. Has the 5-year plan been formulated with a good understanding of the concepts? Has the economic survey has been prepared and written up with a good understanding, clarity in interpretation of concepts and methods, etc. People don't bother about this. Quite often we see these kind of debates going on, but we don't ask the fundamental questions. So this is precisely why I'm telling you that it is very important to have a good understanding of the concepts and techniques before you use them. If you have good understanding, you will never commit this kind of mistakes. Okay. Why should the on-site source? Now I'll say, you may ask the question, why should I, other than your honesty on your part, there are many reasons why we should cite the source. One important reason is that you should ennobly read up. Quite often, as you know, those of us who do research, or when we, as teachers, when we tell our students to write a thesis, first issue we tell them is to do review of literature, so that you know the background, so that you know the issues involved as they exist in the current perception of the experts. So in order to understand that, you should have a good access to, or you should know where from these ideas or the issues are discussed. So that's why it is very to enable the reader to explore the source of the information, to collect information on the current issues that you are studying. It's very important to give this side the source. Okay. Not only that, citing that is the first important, to enable the reader to understand the issues in the right perspective, because the same issue people may interpret and perceive in different ways depending upon your own ideological orientation or your own good understanding of the techniques, etc. So what we do is, so that is the reason it is very important to give complete information about the source. Not only that, so quite often, if you give source, it also absolves you from the mistakes. For instance, okay, in this case, I told you for the economic survey, he has simply plagiarized. The expert who plagiarized has not given the source. If you had given the source, you would have observed, finally said, I've taken from this. But still, offense is an offense. It clearly shows that the expert who prepared this economic survey doesn't know the concept of Gini ratio. So I'm just giving this example. So at least in your case, if you properly cite a quotation, you absorb yourself. And then you can say that I have quoted, I took that from somebody else, and you don't, but still you are revealing that you don't know the concept. It is very important to cite. Then, quite often, whenever you evaluate a research project, for instance, myself and Professor Murthy, quite often we evaluate research projects submitted to the ICSSR. Or even you may evaluate a research output as a matter of thesis evaluation. It may be PhD thesis, it may be MPhil thesis, etc. Then you want to know what is the net contribution of that research effort. Is there anything new? First question we ask is, what is the new in your work? As you know, whenever you write a thesis, whenever somebody goes for thesis evaluation, sometimes the examiners ask this kind of questions. Can you summarize in 3 words the most original contribution of your thesis? Or in 3 sentences, or on a single paragraph, etc. So when you cite the relevant literature in your thesis on your research work, it enables the reader to assess your original contribution to the literature. That is why that's very, very important. Okay. Another most important is, it also promotes the credibility of your work. That is quite often, if you look at, quite often I come across theses where people think that they provide a list of publications, just like in a canteen menu. When you go to a restaurant, they give you a menu. Masala dosa, idli, puri bhaji, this kind of list they give. It's so much people quite often, when they say do a review of literature, they just give a list of publications. Suryanarayana 1926, Murthy 2012. They will simply say what he said, what are the issues. But it is not a review of literature. That is not a review of literature. Giving a menu is not a review of literature. Review of literature has its own role. It essentially proves the foundation for you to lay down the framework for your own dissertation also. That's why acknowledge other articles, acknowledging existing literature is very, very important in academic research work. So this is what we have to keep in mind. So quite often people also think that people quite often avoid citation because they think that it will undermine the originality of their own work. So it is not really true. It helps people to distinguish between your ideas from those of others. So that way I said, what's your net contribution? On the other hand, plus it also facilitates highlighting the originality of your work. How original is your work? If you give a comprehensive presentation of the existing state of knowledge on the issues that you examine or on your thesis topic, what happens is a careful reader or an examiner or a research reviewer, he'll be able to find out and assess the originality of your own work. That is what is important. Then, does it qualify to be called original research? So these are the issues that you have to keep in mind. So for these reasons, it is very important to cite. Fine. When does one cite? I'll give example, give you details so that you don't have any problems. When you borrow words or ideas, you should acknowledge the source. Quite often you do. For example, I gave you this clear. That's the reason I gave this Zakaria case as well as Government of India Economic Survey. In the Government of India Economic Survey, he has completely taken this definition of the Gini ratio, which is wrong anyway, from the UNDP. Plus, you should also cite when you use quotations, when you suppose you quote other sentences, then you should cite. Sometimes you take other sentences and you paraphrase it, you put your own words. Then people think that you don't have to cite, but it is very important to cite. Not only that, sometimes you might take ideas that are proposed by someone else, then you should cite. Okay. When you make a reference to someone else's work also, it is very important to cite with all details about that work. Not only that, it may so happen that your whole thesis completely critically depend upon the ideas developed by someone else. For instance, you may say that, for example, let me just give an example. In 1978, Mr. Montag Ahluwalia, our when the Planning Commission Deputy Chairman, he wrote a very classic paper, Rural Poverty and Agricultural Performance in India. Essentially, he wanted to verify whether there is basis to believe that growth trickles down to the poor in India. So he essentially wanted to verify trickle-down hypothesis. So that was his idea, and he started, in order to verify this hypothesis, he ran a regression. He regressed poverty as a dependent variable and regressed on per capita agricultural output, and he found that there is an inverse relationship between poverty and agricultural output. So originally, he was trying to identify and verify this hypothesis of the trickle-down operation. If there is an inverse relationship between agricultural output and poverty, he said that if it is statistically significant, he took it as evidence of trickle-down in India. And many papers have developed this idea further with the due acknowledgement to Mr. Montag Ahluwalia. So what I'm telling you, this is one important, I should say the entire list, hundreds of papers were published on this particular issue. It became essentially a path-breaking paper. But the question is, what is important to notice, almost all subsequent papers which developed this idea of Mr. Montag Ahluwalia or his technique, if he used a simple linear regression, many people, for example, Clive Bell and Robert Rich, they used ARIMA models, autoregressive integrated moving average, complicated time series econometrics model they used. But all of them in their work give due acknowledgement to Mr. Montag Ahluwalia, who was the first to verify this issue. So I'm just giving an example of a very concrete case where people acknowledge and develop their research further. There are other people who really took this idea of trickle down by Mr. Montag Ahluwalia, try to simulate, not to use different specifications. For instance, Mr. Montag Ahluwalia simply took agricultural poverty as the dependent variable, regress it on per capita agricultural output. Another expert changed the specification further. For example, even Clive Bell pointed out that it is not only agricultural output, inflation also matters. So he changed the specification. He reduced poverty as a function of agricultural output and also in the cost of living index number for the agricultural laborers. That's why he changed the specification. So there are a number of people went on to publish articles. Dr. Nainan from Bangalore, ISEC, he was published an article in EPW. He tried to bring in many other important variables, depending upon his understanding, depending upon his perception of trickle-down operation. There are many people who try to bring in land holdings, so many, this kind of um, specification changes they made. In other words, what is important to acknowledge is the simple idea of testing trickle down using just the interrelationship between poverty and agriculture goes is actually it was originally proposed by Mr. Montecalualia. All the subsequent papers which developed his ideas and his techniques further gave due acknowledgement to him. So this is what I'm this is what I don't want to cite only bad ethics, in literature. So I thought this is one classic example where I should say all the Indian as well as international academicians gave due acknowledgement to Mr. Montecalualia and developed the literature further. This is very, very important. Okay. So that when you look at this whole series of publications, you are able to assess the subsequent developments that take place. And most important for a researcher, they tell you what are the different options people have explored. They also give you idea about how to develop the techniques or how to explore ideas in different ways, different perspectives they throw. So, in other words, as a teacher, when you teach your students, or when you guide your research students, how to proceed in a proper citation, proper listing of articles helps in developing the research literature further. It helps the student in developing his own techniques and thesis further in a very neat, uninterrupted way. That is very, very important. Now, like I said, I'll give you some tips how to really prevent plagiarism. One is address its causes. You should address the causes. So, how do you address the causes? So, essentially, look at the reasons which really prompt us to do plagiarize. Another thing is identify different forms of plagiarism. So, if you know what are the different forms of plagiarism, then that you can do it. Now, of course, what we do is now these days, and we have well-known packages in the internet which are available, but most of the institutions use Turnitin as the package. For instance, even in my institute, at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, what we do is we have made it compulsory for all students to submit, get their thesis cleared by the Turnitin package. And finally, it has to be certified by the supervisor that even if there is some similarity of ideas or sentences, they are justified. There is no plagiarism involved. The supervisor has to certify, and the students have to get a clean sheet from the Turnitin package. Many institutions follow this. For instance, if you look at this, there is on a well-known institution in Pune called Mahindra United World College of India, where students have to submit every term paper, every assignment given by the teacher to the Turnitin and get a clean sheet from the Turnitin package. Unless you have this Turnitin certificate, the teacher won't even accept for evaluation. Similarly, at the Indira Gandhi Institute, many places we follow this rule now. I'm just giving my institute because I know confidently what we do. Many institutions follow this practice now. They submit the research materials. It may be a term paper, it may be assignment paper, or it may be even your thesis. You have to submit them to Turnitin and get a clean sheet. You have to give a certificate that extent of plagiarism is limited, is within reasonable limits. So different. I understand different universities follow different rules. Understand some places, some institutions follow just take 10% as the similarity percentage and permitted. Some universities I understand 20%. Some universities I don't know. Some universities say they up to 40%. I really don't know. But but strictly speaking, I will tell you, when I was the editor of the India Journal of Agricultural Economics, I used to follow the rule zero tolerance for plagiarism. That's what we do. Okay, now let me just give you as teacher. I'm a teacher. You're also, some of you may be teachers. Now, why do students plagiarize? As a teachers, we have a responsibility. Quite often, what happens is now we give unexpected deadlines to the assignments. I know. At least I know several cases when, for example, even in my institution also it happens. Mahindra United World College, I've seen many cases. The teacher generally tells you, I should give my son even the assignment by next Saturday. But suddenly Monday morning, the teacher comes and tells me, no, by this I'm busy, I'm going out, I am going out of station. Or if the teacher have his own reasons, you should submit these assignments by this evening or tomorrow morning. So if suddenly if you get last minute changes in the time allotted for assignments, let up lead to a situation where students plagiarize. So in other words, as teachers, we also have a responsibility to follow certain strict rules and procedures. Another situation where the students end up plagiarizing is when the assignments are too overwhelming. When students have made too many assignments, what they do is then they try to go for shortcut methods. They don't have time to think and write in their own words, or even to paraphrase and with acknowledgements, everything, and they plagiarize. Quite often, students also plagiarize because they don't know the difference between plagiarism and research. So that's the reason, and also in many places, in many of these teaching and training programs, they want to give a lot of emphasis placed on telling the students in simple words. So what is plagiarism? What is the difference between plagiarism and research? It's quite important to do that. Okay, so and finally, what I'm trying to say is that it is important we should know why do people end up plagiarizing? What are the factors which will really lead to this kind of situations? If we know that, we can create situations where even students don't plagiarize, either in submitting their term papers or in their any assignment papers or even their MPhil or dissertation. As teachers, we have a lot of responsibility. Sometimes too, okay, I also agree. There is sometimes what is called intentional plagiarism also. Quite often, as teachers, we think that we are not at all responsible. It's all. I have seen many situations, and as recently I was in London also, there we had a debate on this issue. There are many teachers said, it is not my responsibility to ensure that verify plagiarism, etc. Quite often, teachers take that stand. It is not my business. It is for the student to ensure that there is no plagiarism. So as a result, teacher supervisors don't do that, bother about verifying. As a result, what happens is, in such a situation, students end up plagiarizing. They think that anyway, students don't observe, teachers don't observe. I won't be caught red-handed, and they plagiarize. So this is what it is. Then I also want to make a difference between searching and researching. Okay, and when you produce an original research, it is tiresome. Whereas searching the internet is not at all. So another reason why people end up plagiarizing, what they do is they just Google search in the internet. This is what I have come across as a teacher, but as a thesis examiner, where people simply go to the Google, particularly Google, search available literature, they just cut and paste it. But what is important is we should not do that. Real understanding of the techniques and how to analyze, particularly when it comes to issues, the techniques are econometric techniques or econometric specialized specification, it is very, very important. And you should also know how to process the available information, because we are not, most often, we are not taught how to process available information. For instance, how many of us know really when to use arithmetic mean? Let me just give a couple of examples. People quite often mechanically apply arithmetic mean. For everything, people use, for example, particularly as students of economics, we are very fond of the per capita estimate, per capita income, per capita consumption, per capita. Everything analyzed we per capita. But for lack of understanding of this concept, how we can use it, how when we can use it, without this clear understanding, we end up making wrong inferences and we end up making wrong research contributions. Let me just give you, for example, I'll just give an example from a per capita analysis. If you look at per capita state domestic product, Maharashtra is the richest state in the country. quite often. They keep competing, Maharashtra, Punjab, Haryana. No, sometimes you find, most often you find that Maharashtra is the richest state in the country per capita, in terms of per capita, SGPT per capita income. But if you look at the incidence of poverty or extent of reduction in poverty, Maharashtra is one of the worst performers. Till recently, almost about 60% of the population, particularly rural population, was poor in Maharashtra. How do you reconcile this paradox? On the one hand, when you use a per capita measure, you find that Maharashtra is a very richest state. But when you look at estimates of poverty or extent of poverty reduction, you find that Maharashtra is a very poor performer. How do you reconcile these two results? This essentially happens, because of your failure to understand the concept. What is per capita income? You obtain per capita income measure by applying what we call in statistics mean-based measure of average. Total income divided by the number of population. This is a mean-based estimator. People don't know. Most often we economists don't care when to use per capita income. When to use a per capita measure. You can use the per capita measure only when the distribution is normal or when the distribution is equal, perfectly equal. In such a situation, you will never end up. But you look at an income distribution it's income distribution or consumption distribution, it's always positive distribution. And if you look at the state of Maharashtra, the city of Bombay alone accounts for almost 30% of the state income, 30, sometimes even 40%. Just 4 city city centers, that is Mumbai, Thane, and Pune, and Nasik. If you look at these 4, they account for almost 70% of the state income. There are about 36 districts in Maharashtra. So, in other words, highly unequally distributed income or consumption in Maharashtra. But so if you use a per capita measure, you think that Maharashtra is the richest state. So, in other words, I'm just giving an example that whether it's a statistical concept like mean, or whether it's any economic technique, or it may be even economic concepts, it is very important for us to understand the concept. How can we use this concept? Where do we analyze? In what context we can use? What are the better alternatives to use? As you know, skew distribution, when you have skew distributions or unequal distributions, I cannot use per capita income measure. So, in other words, a clear understanding of the concept is always important in doing research. And okay, fine. How to overcome it? I'm going to give some other examples. That is to facilitate research. So let us not plagiarize. Let us try to understand the concept. Let us to put it in our own original words. So let us avoid our tendency to shortcuts. Quite often we cut and paste. This is well-known in Indian literature. We should not do that. Then another important what happens is among the students, lack of confidence also is an important reason why people try to cut and paste. Okay, so people also get scared that if I try to put in my own words, it will reveal my own limited understanding of the concept, or it will put me in a bad light. I won't come out in glorified colors, etc. So that's the reason quite often students try to cut and paste, cut and plagiarize, etc. Because they try to conceal or they try to conceal their own limitations by resorting to cutting edge page job. So that's why it is very important. I always tell my students, it is very important to carefully think. In other words, whenever my students come, I tell them I have some formula for them. Think, write, after that read, after that understand, what you have written. Then think again whether you have written or convey your ideas very clearly. Then rewrite it. Then read again what you have written. Understand what you have written. Think, revise. In other words, this cycle keeps on. Think, write, read, understand, think, revise, read. So this kind of words I keep on telling, always tell my students, this is what we should do. In fact, that's precisely what I do. Once I write a paper, I think about it, I write it, and then once I have some ideas, I write them, I read them. But most often, what you have to do is best way. If you're, after that, we always get tired of it. It quite often happens to everyone. Sometimes we overlook certain limitations. So it may so happen that you have plagiarized also. So quite often what we do is always give it to the third party, give it someone else who is not at all familiar with your literature and or with your subject or with your techniques, so that they understand. Immediately they will try to find out inconsistency in style, English, or presentation, etc. You always get you get caught. So that is very, very important for you to do it. So when you guide students, it is very important for us to tell them to convey their ideas in their own words and keep rewriting, revising, and improving. That's what it is. Always it's a hard task. It takes time, but what often happens is it is worth the pursuit. So that's the only way we can avoid plagiarism in our research. We can ensure that our research work you know meets all international standards. But quite often we don't make such efforts. That is quite important. And so what else you do? So, but that's why what we do is focus on learning skills. And so these are the skills that you have to focus. When you're teaching your students, as a researcher, when you want to grow, and this is what we have to do. We have to learn all the different skills. It is not simply to estimate a regression equation or to estimate. Quite often people think that running a regression or estimating certain parameters is research. That's not research. Most important is the skills. How to specify, how to improve the specification, what are the problems with the current specification. That's how we think about that's what way we improve the quality of research and make a contribution. So improvement is an important factor. So whenever you, as I told you, whenever you evaluate a thesis or whenever you evaluate research output by anyone, so we always have to say that the net contribution of that research output is a very important factor. We have to consider that factor in even while grading, evaluating a student's thesis, or even the research proposal. Imagine tomorrow, as you know, as Professor Murthy has already cited these ICSR research grants. So when quite often both of us are in several common committees. You just assess what are the net marginal contribution of this proposal. So so in that proper acknowledgement of the existing literature facilitates our assessment. So, that's another reason you have to try to learn to write ideas or convey ideas in your own words and in your own style. That's very, very important. Okay. And there is another important reason why, okay, let me tell you, quite often it happens. Students always do, not only students, even I will tell you, even faculty also try to do it. This is well known in our academic literature, cutting and pasting. People try to ape. They think that many great expert plagiarize. I don't want to name them, but in course of time, as you learn, as you grow, you'll find out. Experts keep plagiarizing, but we should discourage students from plagiarizing. It is not at all. You should never reward them. People you cannot get along with, plagiarize and get away with that. But the students, students do is they, unfortunately, many experts end up plagiarizing. They end up self-plagiarizing. I will give you an example. In my own career, I have come across, without naming, I want to give an example. When it's on a great expert, we had to publish this article. So we got it, proofread everything, and we are about to publish it. Then we found that I submitted to Turnitin. Then I found that this article has already been published 5 years back in a FAO magazine. So this great academic expert, he was not even acknowledging. So I went back to the original research job document. There it is very clearly written. This is copyrighted. and every publication cannot be reproduced without a written permission of the editor. So then I requested this professor to get approval from the editor, original FAO editor, Food and Agriculture Organization. This professor, he refused. But the question is, are you for it was my bad luck. I was the editor. So what I did was that I approached the FAO and sought their permission to republish the same article. And the FAO granted me permission to republish it on the condition that on the first page, I completely acknowledge that it has been already been published elsewhere and give due credit to the original publisher and publication. So this is what I had to do in my profession. I'm sharing with you my own experience as an editor. So quite often people, um, there is another perception that self-plagiarism is not plagiarism. It is not really true. Okay, I'll come to that. And another important reason why happens, why do have we have this plagiarism is poor planning. We don't set aside time for complete assignment that I have already told you. Teachers don't give, but sometimes even students or even as research scholars, what we do is, we just underestimate the time required to complete an assignment and finally end up plagiarizing. So it's very important to have a clear work plan. That's why if you do, those of you who have undertaken or who are going to do research projects for the international institutions or even ICSSR, it clearly tells you to give work plan. It can give you a calendar of events, what you will do in the first week, second week, third week, etc. So that's very, very, very important. A work plan, time schedule is very, very important when you do research. So that you don't commit this kind of mistakes. So work plan is a very critical step. Then prepare bibliographies, outlines, all this even before your final draft. Quite often I have come across students, what they do is they don't prepare bibliography as and when they do new research. Finally, when the thesis is, they're going to submit thesis, they just go and search for public references all over the place. In other words, most often this kind of mistakes happen because of poor planning. Organizing your work schedule is very, very important in academic research. Okay, and quite often there could be unintentional plagiarism also, because quite often people don't know how to cite, what to cite, or not to cite. Recently, I was reviewing a paper, and what happened that I found paragraphs and paragraphs of plagiarism. I gave the source to the author. Then the author said, "This is the this." I said, "Even the source where it is published." Then the author came out and told me that this is actually my paper. Somebody else has plagiarized. Even this can happen. Then I told the author, "No, you should have, if it's your own paragraph, it is my your own sentences, etc. You should have cited your own. There should be self-citation also. You can't just do that." Now, what has happened is he was assessed for plagiarism, this scholar. But there is a very general perception that you can reproduce your own paragraphs and sentences without citing, but it's not really true. That is called self-plagiarism. And there is another perception that plagiarism and paraphrasing. People say again they think that if you so long as you put up these different, you may take ideas from someone else. So long as you paraphrase them, you are not guilty of plagiarism. That's what people think, and it is not really so. Acknowledgement is very, very important, and people try to paraphrase, people try to permutate or play the active voice to passive voice, but then that doesn't absolve them of any of such crimes. It is very important for us to take care of these issues. Okay? I'll also try to finish fast so that if you have any questions, I'll answer them. Poor bibliography listing is also constraints locating this, so that's very, 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 very important. Okay. Okay. Now, when do you use quotes? Whenever you use author's exact words, let me give exact details now. Whenever you reproduce someone else's exact words, you should put them in quotation. It's not only quotations, you have to give them year of publication, date, page number, everything. When you paraphrase ideas, you may use it in your own words. Then also you have to give source properly. Finally, you may also summarize also someone else's main points in your own words and sentence structure. Okay, but still, there is citing is very, very important. All these three, I'm giving you three types of situations, but people think that the second version situation, I've given three scenarios. One is using exact words, reproducing words of the earlier author. This is the extreme case of plagiarism. You have to cite with all details. Paraphrase also you have to cite, and you summarize also you have to cite. But the question is very, very important to that. Fine. Quote when the individual words are just as important as the message. Okay. Paraphrase when the message is more important than the word choice. This is often the case. Summarize when you're dealing with a large amount of relevant source material. When to use the different types of options. When do you again? Why I'm giving this example is quite often people keep on quoting and quoting. I have come across situations either in the research proposals or even the research articles. A chapter is full of quotations only. One doesn't really know what is this man's original contribution, this author's original contribution. So there are certain rules that we have to follow. That's what I'm saying here. When you think that certain words are very important and you won't be able to do justice in any other way, in your own way, for example, in poetry, I give an example, then you have to really put the original words and put them in quotation. But what do we do? So when the message is important, you can just paraphrase it. When there's a lot of information, you can just summarize. You see, these are the certain rules that we follow. Okay, so this is broadly, I think, I have these are main messages. In fact, I can keep on giving. I've got many other situations, but different types of terms. What we use, for plagiarism. What do you mean by ghostwriter? There are different types of concepts like that. I'm not going to touch upon those issues. I thought I could keep it brief, and I just summarize essentially what exactly is plagiarism. What is the need for plagiarism? Avoiding plagiarism. How do you avoid plagiarism? How do you identify plagiarism? Okay, now the well-known techniques are there, Turnitin, etc. And what is his role? And even in facilitating your own research ideas, in developing your own research output. So from all these perspectives, it is very important for us to avoid plagiarism. This is the main message I would like to convey to you. So now I will stop it. And if you have any whatever questions or any issues what you would like to discuss with me, you're welcome. Feel free to ask me any clarification also if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, sir, for the presentation. Participants, I think Dr. S. Krishnakumar, he had raised his hand first, and there is a question.
Shall I shut down this PPT or shall I come on screen? Would you like to refer to any part of this PPT?
So I think we can keep it.
Okay, yeah. Professor Krishna Kumar, Dr. Krishna Kumar, you can ask me whatever question you have. Hello.
Dr. Pramod Malik, sir, has another question on chat.
Okay. Okay. It's on chat, is it?
It is on chat. If you can read or
okay. Okay, I'll read it then. Okay. Sorry. Okay, can you just read it out? I have some problem here.
Yeah.
Let me just see if I can.
So, copyright protects only expression of idea, not idea itself. Okay. Is plagiarism there if there is copying of idea by researchers and thesis?
Sorry, let me see.
No, you couldn't let it there.
So you just click on the chat button, and then you will get to know what is the question.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to do. That I'm trying to go to the
chat. There is a chat box, sir. If you just move your cursor.
I'm trying to open the video. See, I think something happened.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. Chat box, no?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Fine. Mr. Krishna Kumar, there.
The Pramod question is there, sir. Krishna Kumar.
Krishna Kumar, after that, a copyright project is only expression of idea, not idea itself. Is plagiarism there if there is copying of ideas by researchers in thesis? Yes, if without acknowledgement, if you do it, then definitely it's called plagiarism. Acknowledgement is very, very important. Even when you use ideas, acknowledgement is very, very important. In fact, copyright, for all this, if I avoided giving details, there is also time frame for all these things. And suppose if somebody has developed an idea of 70 years after him, or so whatever ideas are available in public domain, you don't have to cite them. There is another important, and particularly if you look at the United Nations style on English language writing, people quite often cite those ideas. These are in public domain, so I don't have to cite. But it's not really so. If there are ideas, you have to. On public facts, you don't have to. For example, sun rises in the east. Everyone knows that. You don't have to cite anyone. So again, I can give what is this. So similarly, I can give. There are many such instances. So, but when you say about ideas, it is very important to cite, acknowledge the source. You may paraphrase them. So, but it's quite important. If there is copying of idea, researchers thesis, then it is plagiarism. If you copy ideas, that's the reason I give an example of. I will give an example of Mr. Monte Ahluwalia's great paper, agricultural performance and rural poverty. That is the original idea. Everyone wrote papers and developed techniques, developed the changing specification. You may say that their specification is different. For example, Clive Bell and Robert Rich, they use completely different specification of auto-regressive integrated moving average model. So you may say that it's a completely new technique, new specification, but the underlying fundamental idea, what they're examining is the interrelationship between poverty and agriculture performance. So that is actually originally from Mr. Monte Ahluwalia, and they cited him, acknowledged his source as the person who is from where they developed the idea. It is very important for us to acknowledge all the ideas in your dissertation or in your research paper. Have I answered your question, Mr. Krishna Kumar, or?
No, I am asking. So I am asking
Mr. Pramod Malik. Yeah.
May I ask the question, sir?
Yeah, tell me.
It was very interesting hearing you, but in certain aspects which you are raising, I really think I have a difference of opinion on.
Okay, tell me. Yes.
Number one is with respect to the economic survey.
Sorry?
Relating Gini coefficient, you have this Gini coefficient, about Gini coefficient. Doesn't this
true.
also come under the domain of public domain? Because irrespective of, now you're already saying that the definition which they have taken from UNDP, that itself is a wrong definition.
Yes.
But isn't Gini coefficient, is that the real plagiarism or something, say, M.H. Suryanarayana study on food security, the essence of it being said, that can be considered to be plagiarism. Somebody is giving a definition to make an ordinary layman understand it. Can this be considered to be plagiarism? Number two is, for example, series of textbooks. Often people come and tell all these college and university teachers to write textbooks. And I have found that the textbooks literally are lifting up.
That's true. I don't know the name them because I know that. I know that there are many textbooks on economics.
No, but how many new ways can we define standard deviation? We cannot define many new ways in defining standard deviation.
Yes. Absolutely true.
Is there for the textbook, is there some different rule? Is there any different rule for plagiarism with respect to textbooks? And number three, sir, is this quotation mark which you were saying, which I also found recently, that in my thesis I had written in the front of a chapter a particular quotation from John Maynard Keynes and written there, essays in persuasion, collected works of John Maynard Keynes. But then also when we were doing the plagiarism check, this was showing up. Then that person told me, no, you put it within inverted commas, because even when we are technically acknowledging, some of the software considers this as unacknowledged. Because if we just put the inverted comma, then it becomes acknowledged. So even when we are, that is also one thing which I found. But particularly, I wanted your answer on this Gini coefficient thing which you were saying, and also on these textbooks. Have they got a different rule when you write a textbook? Is it possible that how much differences anyway it's going to make? These are the.
You're absolutely right. For example, I give this Gini ratio example purposefully to illustrate 2 points, because my main message in this lecture, what I wanted to tell you is that, quite often we end up plagiarizing when our own understanding of the concept or technique is limited. And our own research, such a limited understanding also constrains our development of our own research ideas. That's why it's very important to have a clear understanding of the concept. So 2 things, I think I want to convey 2 messages here. One only message is that the expert who wrote this economic survey paper or that particular chapter doesn't even know what is Gini ratio. Okay, that's why he simply, if he knew what exactly is Gini ratio, he wouldn't have simply plagiarized. He himself didn't know. He simply, as a matter of thing, he had to definition. He simply fill up the sentence in the economic survey. I showed you that. So that's the reason. My main message, what I want to say is, we quite often when we end up plagiarizing, when we don't know the concept, we don't have a clear understanding of the concept. I'm giving with respect to Gini ratio. So many other concepts are there. So, but so here in economic survey example I gave you point, because this is simply, if they give copied that, then the whole fault would have pointed out the mistake of the UNDP. This man, he says, okay, he could have seen given in UNDP. He could have absolved himself of his mistake. But the question is, shows reveals two different dimensions, 2 different types of mistakes. One thing is lack of understanding, shows that either the UNDP expert who prepared who prepared this sentence is he also doesn't know what is Gini ratio, and the Indian expert who followed this also doesn't know expert. And both the experts they've written paragraphs and paragraphs, we don't know what they mean. In other words, I cited this example to show that if you are going to evaluate this research output, it really shows that it's not worth reading this kind of reports. So that is one important message I wanted to convey. Okay, let me tell you. Then let me see. Since you asked me this question, then do you know what exactly is the correct definition of Gini ratio? Hello.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the correct definition of Gini ratio?
I do not exactly know, but the line of perfect equality and that curve, whatever is A upon A plus B, is basically the Gini coefficient ratio.
No, you're right. That is not Gini ratio. That is Lorentz ratio.
That's Lorentz ratio.
Lorentz ratio. Okay. That is originally developed by M.O. Lorentz. And he was drawing that Lorentz curve for a frequency distribution. He had a size distribution, information of size distribution of income or wealth. So he was drawing this Lorentz curve so easily, and he did, as you said, line of equal distribution and Lorentz curve. Then we have this line of then he found the Lorentz area divided by the area of the triangle gives you Lorentz ratio. Gini ratio is not that. Strictly speaking, the Gini ratio 1/2 of relative mean difference. This is the technical definition of Gini ratio. Gini ratio is defined when we have discrete units of observations of every individual. Imagine a society, we have got a size distribution of income, then you could plot the Lorentz curve and estimate the Lorentz ratio. When you have information on every individual household or every individual, then you estimate Gini ratio, that it is technically defined as 1/2 of relative mean difference. Okay, in the limit, suppose in the limit, Gini ratio and Lorentz ratio are the same, but the question is basically Lorentz ratios are defined for size distribution of income. When you have, okay, so that is the reason, and that's why this when we draw a Lorentz ratio, there is always a grouping bias for that. They're not perfect estimates. When you estimate Gini ratio, there you take every individual observation, and your estimate of inequality is not biased or affected by grouping bias. It is a perfect estimate. So that's one thing. So they're not the same at all.
Yeah.
Okay. So if this individual, either the UNDP expert or the Indian Economic, the Minister of Finance expert who prepared this, who wrote that, who wrote that chapter, if they knew, they wouldn't have done this. It is not line of equal distribution, nothing like that. Gini ratio is not that at all. But they're keeping on writing Gini, they're calling Gini ratio, but in fact, what they were writing, reporting were estimates on Lawrence ratios. Okay, again, the estimates of Lawrence ratio are never comparable because of grouping bias efforts different distribution.
In fact, there is information.
Sorry? Yeah, come out. Come up with your question. It's clear. Hello?
Yeah,
Hello?
yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm telling you. That's why. So, for example, in this case, you may just say that on of relative mean difference. How will you put it up? I will write. So there are certain technical definitions. You possibly you can't. You're right. Some of the technical definitions, for example, normal equations. So those who know how are you going to put it? What are you going to give an estimator? Some of those technical definitions just you can't do about it. You have to put them. You just there are certain well-known facts, or in fact there are certain rules where we have to quote, where we don't have to quote. I didn't give every detail, but I give a very broad summary that when you really think that or the author's original sentences are perfect and you can't convey it in any other way, then you put them in quotations. Then when your message is important, you can just paraphrase them. And when you have tons of pages, you essentially put in a summary form. That's what I said. So in fact, when you really come to, if you look at any of these Chicago style manual or UNICEF style manual, they clearly tell you when to use quotations, when to use, just say or citation, just an acknowledgement. There are different rules for that. We have to keep taking it. But again, as you said, that's true. If you give it to Turnitin package, and so you may give a bibliography, and it will say that there is similarity. You're absolutely right. That's why it also gives a command. When you really carry out a check for plagiarism, you can always say exempt bibliography, or exempt cases put in citation. There are different rules. Even Turnitin gives package. These software packages give you different options. What to take into account, what not to take into account, everything. Now these are well known, so we can just follow those rules. But ideally, one thing, when as a research scholars, what you do one has to just go through some of these manuals once in a while, like the Chicago style, or even this UNICEF, etc. So they still give rules when to cite. I cannot go into all those details. Just wanted to give a flavor of how serious is this plagiarism. As I told you recently, an economic advisor was caught in Indian Express, publicly announced in the front page, and withdrew this paper. Quite often it happens. As I told you, I showed you Times of India as Bombay University professor, and this one prominently displayed in Times of India. So these days there is greater awareness. So to ensure our own credibility, and sometimes many journals just straight away submit to plagiarism check. Unless it is less than some 10 or 20%, they don't even consider to send it for review. So that is why I thought we should be aware of this kind of issue. But we should also know how important it is for us to understand the concept. I always emphasize the need to avoid plagiarism, not because of plagiarism per se, but because a good understanding helps develop our own research ideas, our own research paper in a very constructive manner, and it may have facilitated a new contribution. That way, it also facilitates in the publication credibility of your research paper. That's the reason I always tell my students, let us avoid plagiarism. This is this is main message I would like to convey to you all. Any other question?
Sir, I would request the participants to pose the questions directly to you.
Yeah. Absolutely fine. You must be having my email. Ramesh. So, okay. Do you haven't? Anyway.
So we'll request the students, the participants to kindly, we'll share the email ID of
Okay.
Suryanarayanan, and
Sure.
we can be in touch with you after this session also.
Sure, absolutely. No, not only any time, on the research. Okay, I just decided to talk on plagiarism because increasingly these days it's become very, very important issue.
Yes,
So
sir.
I thought I found limited awareness also. That's the reason I thought I should talk on this. I found it more convenient.
For all researchers
Yeah.
and guides
Okay,
actually.
so it is very important. Okay, and not only this, any research methodology issue, feel free to send me questions. I'll be very happy to get back to you because in the process I also learn.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Suryanarayan. Is indeed this thing, all of us, including some of them who have asked the questions, they have benefited. And any time that you have any questions regarding your research and methodology related, the person who will be available is Professor Suryanarayana. And he will be very happy to respond you very quickly. I think we have the next session. Thank you very much, Professor Suryanarayana.
Thank you, Professor Murthy. Sorry, I took extra time. Sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine.
Okay. Okay, Professor Murthy has my email. Professor Murthy will just pass it on to you. I don't know. I don't know how can I pass it on to everyone. I don't know. Maybe participants.
We'll do it from our end, sir.
Okay, please do it so that students may anytime they can ask me questions anytime. But I'll be happy to share to the extent I know. I'll definitely happy. I don't claim to know each and everything. I'll try to make an effort to understand and get back to you.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, nice talking to you all. Have a nice. Professor Murthy, special thanks to you for giving this opportunity.
No, I should say thanks to you, sir. Thanks.
No, sir.
And we will start the next session at 5:10. Thank you for this session, and we will start the next session at 5:10.
Okay, thank you.
I think Indrani